Ha. So I am doing a live on Quilt, and this is also being recorded on YouTube so I can share this information. Um, Please excuse. Well, you know what? I won't excuse it. I got my brace on. It's late in Hawaii. It's almost about 1:30. I'm tired but inspired, right? Tired and inspired. And I'm here to talk about the art and the beauty and the gift of Yoni steaming. My new book, The Whole Truth. It's also about epigenetics, mindfulness, nutrition, all the things I did to personally rid myself of PCOS symptoms. And what was really neat about the whole process is that I didn't even know I was doing it until, of course, that's how you figure most things out. It's kind of default, right? Um, anyway, I guess what's the best way to start this? I can either talk about how I'm either qualified to do this or what my experiences were or how I can help uplift people. But mostly, I think I like to inform people about what Yoni steams are. So there's a lot of practice or there's a lot of crosstalk out there. And ultimately, Yoni steaming is the act of usually with herbs and flowers, and you use herbs with water to steam. You heat up the herbs and water. It creates the steam, and you either crouch over or lay over or sit on top of these herbs and allow the herbs to transfuse with the membranes of the yoni. Um, so there are a lot of blood vessels within the yoni, and so it's able to really um, let in a lot of the oleochemicals. That's what we're calling them when we're referring to broad term plants and herbs. They transfuse with what's going on with the blood, right? Because he has a lot of blood vessels and a lot of capillaries in the yoni herself. Okay, so what's a yoni? I'm like, let me just use some of my intuitive inklings to help people clue into this. What is a yoni? A yoni is a Sanskrit word for the female reproductive system, particularly like from the outside to the inside. So all of it together is called the yoni. So steaming the yoni is steaming this space. Let's see, what else? Just to be matter of fact, right? Question, answer, question, answer. Um, there are several different ways to do yoni steaming, whether we um, to get the most out of a yoni steam, I highly suggest you work with the mind, body, and spirit integration. Like you work with all of those three things, um, so that well, I mean, obviously, yoni steaming, you're going to be using the body, but if you're not really in the mindset or you're not using clear or intuitive thought to connect with your yoni, to connect with the healing process that is going on. Um, it's not it's not Western medicine. It's not even really, I mean, it's partially Eastern medicine, but it's been used for thousands of years from various tribes all over the world. So women have been treating themselves and each other for thousands of years using this medicine that is rarely talked about. And it's interesting because they want to shame the woman and they want to talk about how her body is dirty and this and that. But in reality, we are the keepers of life. We are the bringers of humanity here on earth. And so we need to be cherished. We need to be valued. We need to be understood, heard, and listened to and acknowledged. And with the amount of traumatization that is happening on this planet, It's key that women, especially women who have the ability or the power to do so, have some autonomy over their own bodies. And one way to not only utilize self care, but also heal generational trauma, any physical trauma within that person's life, sexual trauma, as well as downregulate epigenetics, are downregulate and upregulate, because you can downregulate negatives and upregulate positives, um, especially when there are high amounts of, let's say, cortisol or other hormones related to stress being pumped through the system. So some people know this and some people don't, but an anxious mother creates an anxious child, not because the child is inherently anxious, but because anxiousness is a response to typically environmental stimulus. And so when you become anxious, you have a certain set of you'll have certain things being produced within the cell. Okay. So let me make that, because I'm really, so it's like I'm trained to be humble, right? I'm really smart. So I might jump ahead or go really deep. So let me slow down a little bit. Epigenetics. What is epigenetics? And if you're a biologist, feel free to comment. Feel free to say whatever it is you need to say. But yes, epigenetics. So I'm going to try to break this down as fundamentally as possible. There's always a lot of caveats or things to the side where there's exceptions to the rule and so on and so forth. But primarily, this is how the broad topic of genetics works. Genetics are genes passed down from parent to a child. Now, when a child is created, typically we're going to focus on the female child. So, when a female child is created, her eggs are also created at that moment. So, the eggs are primarily based on the um, grandmother and grandfather of that child. Mm, that wasn't a very great explanation. It's actually, oh, excuse me, I told you it's late. There's actually a better explanation in my book. So let me see. So, like, my eggs were created in my mother. So they're more closely related to her, right, and my father. But this will only show up in my child, which will be their grandchild. Maybe that's a little clearer. Okay. So they pass down a series of genes. Okay. They pass down a series of chromosomes and traits that are going to go to this child. Now, if my mother was highly stressed or had to deal with a lot of trauma while in her lifetime, she will have something called epigenetic markers, which every cell has epigenetic markers. Like skin cells will have markers that say, um, you be a fingernail, and you be the hair on the knuckle, the little thing between the knuckles, and you be this and that, right? So it'll have these little methylations, they're little markers that say, be active in this cell, right? But all cells carry all DNA. And the epigenetics will show up within all of the system, but only parts of the system behave in certain methods. Like your eye is going to be an eye, and the white part of your eye will be white. That's part of the DNA, right? And then the brown part or blue part or whatever color your eyes are will have that, let's say, be blue, be brown. Okay. So, in terms of stress responses and handling trauma, when you undergo certain amounts of trauma, not only does it create an epigenetic signature, especially for people who go through huge events like the Depression or slavery, like different types of oppression, um, massive amounts of sexual assault, because sexual assault was used as part of weaponry and control of people for a long time. And so they think of it as conditioning, but what it really is shaping the genetic signature to look a certain way. Okay. And this can be passed down easily. So, like I was saying, an anxious mother will create an anxious child. So, all of the anxiousness and the stress that was put on the mother, the child now has more of these epigenetic signatures, and so do the eggs, right? The eggs are going to have even more because the body was trained. This is what you need for survival. And ultimately, what our bodies and what our minds and what we're here to do is survive, right? And thrive. But we're now moving into a space where a lot of people are, let's say, disembodied, disconnected from the body. They are taught that the body is alien or foreign to them and that they should just remove pieces to become better, or ignore like just numb and cut off symptoms, ignore them and just have pieces removed, as opposed to changing the entire system of why the disease is in the body in the first place. So my book, it focuses on how I was able, using this multi-pronged approach, and I don't think I'm going to really get into everything, a little piece here in this. I probably won't even get close. I mean, you saw how long I'm sorry, it's tired. How long it took me to talk about epigenetics. um, Let me put this up here. I'll try to make some more consistent content, but this is too late for me to be making this kind of content. I wonder. Okay, so so you guys have an idea of what epigenetics is. You guys have an idea of what genes are. You have an idea of how it's passed down. Now, I mean, these are really broad strokes, okay? This is just to get you to understand the importance of you just being mindful. So we'll touch on mindfulness for a second. Mindfulness is really interesting, and I was able to find a lot of articles in PubMed to corroborate my belief, right? It's so interesting because how science is built is it builds on studies, right? It doesn't actually, and the studies have to be performed in a very specific fashion for them to be considered science, okay? And everything outside of that is considered non-science or pseudoscience. And when you enter into the realm of spirituality, unless you're talking on a quantum physics level, they won't even have that conversation, right? Because spiritual things cannot be proven scientifically because there's no consistency or repeatability within it. However, even though millions throughout time have been able to help heal and work and process the toxicity out of their body using the process of Yoni Steaming, it has not been scientifically proven because the studies have not and are yet to be done, right? But you'll hear a lot of crosstalk about talking down about it. But if I myself was able to process cysts and have a beautiful, healthy, brilliant child, and I know so many other women who are passing fibroids naturally, able to regulate their menstrual cycles, have periods again, have children, um, and rid themselves of pain from endometriosis. And, like, there's some women who have actually reversed cancer. Okay. So the possibilities of the effects of it, the effects of the biohack are amazing, but you have to do the work, and the work is not just one way, it's multifaceted, because you not only need to be supplying your body with the proper nutrients and fuel so that it can work for the cell to become its optimal self, for it to stop inexplicable differentiating, creating cancers or fibroids or tumors within the uterus and ovaries, to help the body actually switch into processing um, the ovum correctly, right? Which is what happens with PCOS. So instead of the egg coming with the lining into the uterus, it gets stuck within the ovary cycle, or within the ovaries part of the cycle, and it doesn't leave, and it just has all these cysts. Yeah, so the woman may still have her menstrual cycle, but not actually be processing processing the ova, that releasing. So there's a whole lot, and they want to overgeneralize women's health. They want to overgeneralize health so that people don't realize that they're very individual. We have very unique machinery, but the causes that have our machinery go off are pretty standard across the board. We have too much exposure to plastics, too much exposure to chemicals, um, and this is throwing our body's systems off from working properly. There's a lot of hormones in the food. There's a lot of inflammatories in the food. Um, there gets to be a whole shift in the consciousness towards how we eat. And food is medicine, right? So, what we expose ourselves to in terms of even just cleaning our house, the perfumes, the lotions. I mean, I remember I started making my own skincare products when I was about 18, because that's when they told me your grandmother's going through her second bout of chemo. So it wasn't her first bout. This was her second bout. And they were talking about giving a mastectomy, double mastectomy. And I was like, wait, what's happening? What's in cancer? How do people get cancer? Right. So I have my own belief systems about how people get breast cancer. And I have a lot of degrees and a lot of time and observation, as well as being going through the medical system and having dealt with so much bullshit. I mean, I kind of pulled this short end of the stick with a lot of things, but I'm pretty sure all that's changed around, especially since I'm willing to share all the stuff that I've learned. I've hard won learned for you. So take it, enjoy it. So the beauty of the Yoni Steam. So I'm just going to cut to the chase. Whether you work with me or buy my book or whatever, I'm going to put um, the link in the bio for YouTube. And for those of you listening on Quilt, you can find it on the first link in my bio, my Instagram. But here's the deal. Yoni Steaming cuts through a lot of the heavy lifting. So the body holds disease. The mind can also hold disease, and it holds that pressure over and over again. And it shows up in different places in the body. And so often, things that we get stuck on loop mentally or emotionally, traumas that we face and have experienced, they can show up as disease in the body. So not only can our issues show up, but so can our ancestors' issues show up. And so, with the generations and generations of oppression and abuse and misuse, there's a lot to heal from. So, in terms of doing shadow work or being willing to look at the shadow, and that's a topic for a whole another episode because I don't want to keep it too long. When you're yoni steaming, not only does it do the physical transference of the allochemicals that can help regulate your hormones or whatever the benefit is of the particular herbs that you're using, but now you're softening the space of the womb, of the ovaries, to relax and get back into its fluidity and its flow versus holding and keeping rigid. And it works on multiple levels, from rigid concepts and ideas and things frozen and stuck within the nature of the personal matrix. Okay? But then also, it holds stiff the ideas or the traumas that have been passed down somatically from generation to generation. It calms the nervous system. Which can help increase the levels of oxytocin, and I think it can help level out. I don't want to misspeak on that, so I have to look up to make sure how it plays with the levels of progesterone. But you can do that with the herbs that you are using in your steam as well. And so I like to think of it as what happens when you gently warm something up. So I'm jumping back and forth. Yes, there are places that do Yoni steams. Yes, you can go and get one done, but are they actually asking you, are you able to get into a meditative state? So the studies that we're talking about a little earlier, and I'm so sorry that I do this looping thing. I'm working on it. Plus, it's super late, and I'll probably go to sleep after this. But the studies say that mindfulness changes epigenetic signatures, period. Mindfulness changes how your genes work on a micro level. And once it does this to one cell, it then can extrapolate out to the other cells because they're all communicating with each other. Right? Your entire system is a fluid dynamic. It's impossible to stay the same. Now, if you mentally take the time to be present, to relax into your breathing, to visualize, let's say you have a negative experience, which will change, and either you'll hold your breath or you'll tighten, and you breathe into that space and you go through and change it. You have the ability to change how your body physically responds to it on an epigenetic level, which then extrapolates itself to how the body behaves differently. You could produce less cortisol. You can create more oxytocin. You can create more peace in your life. You can start to forgive. You can start to understand and be more open. Whereas before, maybe you were rigid or maybe you were resistant. And I'm broad stroking these concepts again, just so I hope you understand that, yeah, you can go and drink a glass of wine and sit on a Yoni steam, but the whole point of it is to fully alchemize into who you are here to be, your highest self, your calmest, your most rational. Because when we're all in that state, the world becomes better for our children. And the issues that seemed so important before become trivial. Why do we fight? Typically, ego, right? Because when we look at things, we know whether it's good for all of mankind or not. I mean, straight up, whether we want to acknowledge it or not, it's our personal responsibility to make sure that we work on our own stuff and that we have the wisdom to know when we can change and not change things. So I encourage you all to remain conscious. If you can, practice Yoni steaming. You want to minimize your exposure to plastics when you do. Heating plastics leaches out other chemicals that do cause physical harm. They do cause cancers in the body. But I bet you open something plastic today to eat. Yeah. So being aware of how we can minimize our exposure to things that lead to faster and more painful deaths, why not slow down and take some time to do a Yoni steam? Why not slow down to even take some time to think about where you learned those negative habits, especially the negative self talk, especially the belittling of your own power and who you are as an individual? You know, I often find myself with analysis paralysis because of my perfectionism. I realize that things can go a certain way or become so much better if I just XYZ, right? But there's nothing better than now. There's nothing more perfect than this moment to share this with you. Just like there's nothing better than now for you to realize that maybe you're being too hard on yourself and it's okay to let yourself relax a little bit. It's okay to let yourself play. It's okay to explore who you are and your body, your sacred temple, and how can you treat it more sacredly. When we're all going through this, so I'm going to get into more spiritual conversation, right? So we're all going through this ascension process, and we're being pressurized, I guess, into the diamond level of our consciousness. And we're beginning to not only appreciate ourselves, but appreciate and value ourselves, but appreciate and value others. And as we start to set boundaries, we allow ourselves to see more freedom, and we see where things are not working within ourselves, certain mindsets, certain eating habits, certain like lack of exercising or maybe over exercising. And there's all kinds of things across the board. And we make the subtle changes. And if we fall off, we just get back up again and we make them again. And we trust ourselves and we promise that this is that last time, and we do our best to mean that. So have patience with yourself, just like you would a child who's learning to walk. If they just came out of the womb a day ago, they're just learning how to look and be in the world. They're a bit overwhelmed, so expecting them to walk on day one is a bit much. But if you give them the time and the encouragement and you show them how to walk, they'll be running sooner than you can say, and then you can blink, right? Because time is relative and it does get faster and faster. So just make a little time for yourself, even for that self discovery, even for that growth, just so that you can, taking the step to breathe, taking the step to catch yourself in a negative thought spiral, or before you're eating unconsciously, or before you're spending just to comfort yourself. You start to look at where the origins of those feelings came from. And the womb, okay, all parts of the body have voice, right? Like your skin, it itches, and then you say, oh, I scratch it, something must have happened, right? Well, this is true for the internal. Now, the reason we don't feel everything all the time is because that'd be overwhelming, right? But the womb, she has a voice. And as you start to steam and connect with that womb space, you actually connect with you on a deepest level, you in your femininity. And whether you've had a hysterectomy or not, and there are over 600,000 women a year in the United States alone getting vasectomy, or what did I say? Hysterectomy. Did I also say vasectomy? It's not even close. Excuse me. A hysterectomy. So over 600,000 women this year had hysterectomies. Did they have options? Yes. Were they told they had options? No, because science has not acknowledged the power of this 1,000-year-old practice. More than 1,000. Okay. Earliest I found was it was either 3,000 years they've been doing this. And people have success. So trust yourself. You found this video for a reason. It'll be up. I've got some programs running. Check out my book. It'll help walk you through a little bit more of my process, and you can possibly use it for your process. How to get into a diet that's low in inflammatories, and just check out Yoni Steaming. Even if you just click on another video that talks about Yoni Steaming and the beauty of it, I highly suggest it, because having a child was the greatest gift I had been praying for. So, you know, it's nice to be able to have that child too and have them communicate with the family that you never thought you would communicate with again because it's so traumatic. So it actually changes things in a very interesting way. And so if you talk to some other women who've had Yoni steamings, like deep spiritual Yoni steamings, where you're actually going within, you're processing, you're connecting, not the I'm sitting down and I'm having a glass of wine kind of Yoni steam. That's all well and good, but you know, you don't, let's see. I guess if you want a car wash, you go want a car wash, but if you want a detail, it's a whole nother level of fine work. And that requires being open to look at your particular issues. And there is no scapegoating this. Everybody's going through it. And whether you, I choose to kind of step in wholeheartedly and face it and acknowledge it. And if it's awkward, if it's painful, you know, you breathe and you ask, what's the lesson from this? And so I hope that everyone is able to learn their lesson so that our future generations we can just progress and the world will be a better place for it. Anyway, thank you so much for taking the time. Everyone repeat after me. I trust my knowing. I trust my knowing. I trust my knowing. And so it is. So listen to your body. Check out Yoni Steaming. Check out my book. Get yourself a copy today. There's a more succinct method there, and I have a Yummy Yoni reprogram coming up soon that's going to help you kind of fall in love with yourself and help you connect with your womb space. And if you'd like a private one-on-one consultation or to enter into my Conscious Golden community, there's also a link as well. I'll be doing live private group Yoni steaming twice a month, and there's a bunch of other goodies that'll be in there. Anyway, stay blessed, stay golden, and remember, as you're going through this process, I trust my knowing, I trust my knowing, I trust my knowing.